Rick Ross just walked into the worst week of his entire career, and what is happening to him right now is honestly hard to even put into words. In the span of about 72 hours, the boss went from calling himself untouchable, from telling every single podcast host in America that he had just delivered a classic, from bragging that he was operating on a level almost no rapper alive could reach, to watching his brand new album set in stone get dragged through the mud on every corner of the internet. And I am not exaggerating when I say this, because what you are about to hear is not a small dip, it is not a rough opening week, it is not the kind of setback a veteran can shake off with a smile. This is a full public collapse, playing out in real time, on the biggest stage hip-hop has, and Rick Ross is standing in the middle of it with nowhere to hide. Empty arenas. Streams that reportedly did not even crack 10,000 on some songs. A first-day number so small that 50 Cent literally logged onto the internet just to laugh at it. Ticket sites offering buy one get one half off before the tour has even started. And on top of every single one of those things, the two men Rick Ross spent the last 3 months attacking, Drake and 50 Cent, are now sitting back watching the whole thing unravel without having to lift a finger. So stay right where you are, because in the next few minutes I am going to walk you through everything that just happened, every number, every leaked report, every viral clip, every insult from 50 Cent, every whisper about Drake. And by the end of this you are going to understand exactly why people inside the industry are already calling Set in Stone the single most embarrassing rollout of any legacy rapper in the last 10 years. Let me start with the piece that has everybody talking, because this is where the story really begins to bend into something you do not see very often in hip-hop. For nearly 3 straight months, Rick Ross was on a promotional run that felt less like an album cycle and more like a victory lap. Every week there was a new podcast, a new sit-down, a new clip circulating on Twitter and Instagram. And he was not out there talking about beats and features and studio sessions the way most artists do when they are trying to sell a project. He was out there swinging. He was going after Drake in one interview, poking at 50 Cent in the next, tossing what looked suspiciously like a shot at Jay-Z on a whole other stop, and refusing to let any old feuds stay buried. If you gave the Miami boss a microphone in the last 90 days, you were getting 3 names for the price of 1, and none of those names were happy about it. It was the kind of run that made older heads nod their heads, because it felt like classic Rosie. It felt like the boss energy he built his brand on. But something about the timing of it, and the volume of it, and the way he kept promising that Set in Stone was going to blow the doors off the industry, started to feel less like confidence and more like a man trying very hard to convince a room that already had 1 foot out the door. Then the album finally arrived. And within hours, the internet flipped the entire narrative on him. This was not a slow burn where reviews trickled in over the weekend and opinions slowly formed. This was immediate. Within the first afternoon of the project being out, the trending topic across hip-hop Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, every reaction channel on YouTube, every group chat in the culture was not the music. It was the disaster. People were not debating which track was the standout. They were debating which track was the worst. They were not arguing about whether Set in Stone was better than his last 3 albums. They were arguing about how quickly it deserved to be forgotten. And the strangest part of all of this, the part that even longtime defenders had to admit felt different, was that the criticism was not coming from one angle. It was coming from every angle at once. Drake fans were laughing. 50 Cent fans were laughing. Kendrick fans were laughing. Neutral listeners were laughing. Even the corners of hip-hop Twitter that normally cannot agree on the color of the sky were suddenly holding hands and agreeing that the Miami veteran had dropped one of the most disappointing albums of his entire career. And then the numbers started to leak. And this is where the story goes from a bad review cycle to a full commercial catastrophe. According to the early tracking data that began circulating within 24 hours of release, Set in Stone opened with roughly 1.8 million total streams on its first day. That number, on the surface, sounds fine. It sounds like a normal album. But once you translate that back into equivalent album units, once you actually do the math the industry uses to rank chart performance, that opening day equals somewhere in the range of 1,200 to 1,400 sold albums. 1,200. For a veteran of that stature. For a project he promoted for 3 months on every major platform in the country. For an artist like Rick Ross, who kept looking directly into the camera and telling everyone within earshot that this was a classic. 1200. And that was the first day, which is supposed to be the biggest day, the day the diehards run out and stream everything on repeat, the day when the numbers are inflated by pent-up demand. If day one was already that soft, the rest of the week was almost mathematically guaranteed to look worse. Now, ordinarily, when an album gets battered by critics, an artist has one clean escape route. That escape route is called sales. If the reviews are bad, but the numbers are good, the artist can shrug and point at the receipts and say, "The streets showed up, the fans decided, the critics do not matter." That defense has saved a lot of albums over the years. But Rick Ross could not reach for it this time, because the numbers came in even softer than the reviews. And once the projections dropped, the whole industry realized what was actually happening. The Miami veteran was heading for a debut somewhere well below the top 20 on the Billboard 200. Some early estimates had the album moving fewer than 26,000 units for the entire week. Other estimates went even lower, whispering that Set in Stone might not even secure a spot on the chart at all. Think about how loud that is. Think about how much weight is packed into that sentence. A living hip-hop legend, a man who once opened albums at nearly 250,000 in his first week, was suddenly staring down a projection that suggested his new album could get outsold by artists most of his fans have never heard of. And to his credit, he tried to get ahead of it. On more than one interview during the promo run, he said he was not focused on sales. He said quality was what mattered. He said the culture would recognize the art. And in a vacuum, that is a completely respectable position to take. Plenty of legendary albums did modest numbers on release and grew into classics over time. But here is the trap Rosie walked himself into, and it is a trap he built with his own hands. You cannot spend 3 months telling the world that your album is a classic, that you are operating above every other rapper in the game, that Drake needed a care package from you to survive, that 50 Cent is irrelevant, that the culture is starving for a real boss to feed them, and then, the second the numbers come in low, pivot to, well, the sales do not really matter to me. The audience remembers what you said. The internet remembers what you said. And once you set the bar that high in public, the moment the numbers do not clear it, every clip of you setting that bar becomes a weapon that gets pointed right back in your direction. Which is exactly what happened. Within hours of the projections leaking, old clips flooded every timeline in hip-hop. Clips of the boss calling other artists flops. Clips of him laughing at rappers who moved less than a certain threshold. Clips of him specifically dismissing Drake's commercial performance, even though Drake, in the same window he was being mocked, had multiple songs sitting inside the Billboard Top 10 and streaming numbers Rosie could only dream about. That contrast, that one-on-one comparison between the mouth and the receipts, became the whole story overnight. And people were not being subtle about it. Fans were posting side-by-side charts. Reaction channels were pulling up screenshots. Analysts were doing full breakdowns explaining how a single recent Drake single had, according to some of the numbers going around, generated more streams in a shorter window than the entire Set in Stone album had generated in its opening days. Whether that comparison is completely airtight or slightly exaggerated, it does not really matter, because the vibe has already taken hold. In the court of public opinion, Rick Ross lost that argument before he ever finished making it. Then 50 Cent stepped in. And when 50 Cent steps in on something like this, you already know how the day is going to end. Within a very short window of the sales projections beginning to circulate, 50 Cent hit his page with a screenshot, an emoji, and a caption that read something along the lines of, "Yo, I just saw your record sales. Laughing, 2,000. What is going on?" 2,000. That is the number 50 Cent threw into the atmosphere. And whether that figure is 100% accurate or slightly off from the official count, it did not matter, because 50 Cent understood something the rest of the internet was still catching up to. The story was no longer about the music. The story was about the freefall. And 50 Cent, as always, was more than happy to grab the microphone and narrate. He kept going. He reposted old clips of the boss calling himself the boss. He tagged the projected sales next to those clips. He resurfaced dismissive quotes about other artists and juxtaposed them against the Set in Stone numbers. He even started referencing a nickname, Mr. Recoup, that everybody in the industry understood was aimed directly at Rick Ross's ability, or inability, to earn back the money spent making this album a big deal. And every single one of those posts landed harder than the last because 50 Cent was not saying anything new. 50 Cent was just holding up a mirror to what Rosie had spent 3 months saying about everybody else. And now let me pull the camera back for a second, because I want you to see the full shape of what is happening. Not just the sales, not just the 50 Cent posts, but the whole picture. Because while Set in Stone was collapsing on the streaming side, another story was quietly breaking on the touring side, and it is honestly worse than the album news. He had recently announced a world tour meant to ride the momentum of Set in Stone into arenas across the country and eventually the globe. But according to seat maps that began circulating within days of the announcement, the tickets were not moving. And they were not just barely moving, they were sitting there on the shelf like nobody had even walked past the store. Screenshots of one Miami date showed a venue that was mostly untouched, with a sea of green dots representing seats that no fan had picked up. Miami. His home city. The city that made him. The city that treats him like royalty. Even Miami was not showing up. And instead of pulling the plug and rethinking the strategy, his team reportedly rolled out a promotion offering buy one seat get one at half off, which is not exactly the kind of pricing strategy you see when demand is red hot. It is the kind of pricing strategy you see when a promoter is trying to salvage a room that is not filling. Now stack all of that on top of each other and try to see it the way the rest of the industry is currently seeing it. You have an album that critics are calling one of the weakest projects of the boss's career. You have projected first-week numbers that would embarrass a mid-tier newcomer, let alone a veteran boss. You have streaming figures on individual songs that reportedly failed to clear 10,000 in some cases. You have a tour that is not selling out its home city. You have 50 Cent laughing at you publicly with screenshots. You have Drake ignoring you completely, which somehow feels worse than a diss track, because when the man you spent 3 months poking will not even acknowledge you exist, that silence is louder than any response could ever be. And you have 3 months of quotes on tape, all of them insisting that this was going to be a defining classic, all of them now recirculating with laughing emojis attached to them. That is not a rough release. That is a career pileup. And here is where the story gets even more interesting, because none of what is happening right now happened by accident. There is a very specific sequence of choices that got him here, and once you understand the sequence, the collapse starts to look almost inevitable in hindsight. Choice number 1 was leaning so heavily on beef during the promo run. Rick Ross made a calculated bet that controversy would keep his name in every headline, and in the short term, that bet worked. Every clip of him saying something wild about Drake or 50 Cent went viral. Every accusation ate up a full news cycle. But there is a cost to that strategy, and the cost is that you condition the audience to show up for the drama and not for the music. So when the album finally arrives and the drama is not there, the audience already got what it wanted for free. There is no reason left for them to press play. That is exactly what happened here. Rick Ross fed the internet 3 months of appetizers, and by the time the main course showed up, everybody was already full. Choice number 2 was The Promise. He did not just say Set in Stone was good. He said it was a classic. He said very few artists were on his level. He looked into cameras and stacked one bold claim on top of another. And when you do that as a veteran with a long catalog, you are not lifting the album, you are lifting the expectations attached to it. And expectations are ruthless. They do not care about your legacy. They do not care about your past hits. They do not care about your ability to sit down and talk your talk on a podcast. They only care about the moment the play button gets pressed. And if the moment does not clear the bar you set for it, the audience does not just walk away disappointed. The audience walks away feeling like it was lied to. That is a completely different flavor of backlash, and that is the flavor Rick Ross is currently drowning in. Choice number 3 was the sound of the album itself. Multiple listeners who actually gave Set in Stone a fair shot, listeners who came in wanting to like it, listeners who genuinely respect the boss's catalog, all landed in roughly the same place. They said the album felt scattered. They said it sounded less like a unified artistic statement and more like a stack of songs pulled together with a lineup of famous features. They said there was no clear direction, no clear theme, no clear sonic identity holding the project together. And when a listener describes an album that way, that is the death sentence for replay value. Because replay value is what turns a first-week bump into a long tail. Replay value is what carries an album from launch day into the year-end conversation. And if the average listener is walking away from Set in Stone unable to name the moment that hit them, unable to point to a track that got stuck in their head, unable to describe what the album was actually about, then there is nothing to bring them back for round two. And without round two, the streams do exactly what these streams did this week. They fall off a cliff. Choice number 4 is the one I think will end up being the most damaging in the long run, and it is the choice Rick Ross made about Drake. Because whether Rick Ross wants to admit it or not, the numbers tell a very specific story about the role Drake used to play in his commercial ecosystem. His biggest hits of the last decade, the songs that lived on the radio, the songs that filled arenas, the songs that turned casual fans into lifelong listeners, a huge portion of them featured Drake or were built around a Drake hook. That is not an insult to his talent, that is just a description of how the modern hit machine works. Drake is the biggest streaming artist alive. When Drake shows up on your song grows a second set of legs. And now Rick Ross has gone out of his way to publicly burn that bridge at the exact moment when his solo commercial pull is at its weakest point in years. Multiple analysts have already looked at Set in Stone and quietly noted the same thing. There is no Drake anywhere on this album. There is no big radio-ready duet. There is no crossover single with a hook that a casual fan can hum on the way to work. And you can feel the absence of that in every streaming report that came out this week. Now let me be very fair for a moment, because this whole video would feel one-sided if I did not stop and acknowledge something important. Rick Ross is one of the strongest pens hip-hop has ever produced. He is a voice you can pick out of any lineup. He has built a legacy that entire regions of the country would not sound the way they sound without him. He has released classic material, he has mentored careers, he has kept Miami on the map in an era when the sound of the industry kept shifting. None of what is happening this week erases that. None of it. And there is a real conversation to be had about how the internet treats veteran artists, about how quickly a bad week can drown out a great career, about how one soft release can become a meme even when the artist has 10 stronger projects in the archive. That conversation deserves to happen. But it also cannot be used as a shield to pretend that this specific rollout, this specific promo run, this specific album went well. Because it did not. And his own words are the reason the failure is being magnified this loud. Which brings us to the moment that, in my opinion, sums up this entire week better than any statistic could. Because there is a specific interview clip that started making the rounds in the last 48 hours, and if you have not seen it yet, you need to understand what it represents. In the clip, Rick Ross is asked directly whether he is putting the Drake beef to rest, and instead of answering yes or no, he gives one of those cryptic, half-smiling responses that basically leaves the door open in both directions. And on the same day, on the same platform, on the same internet, he is caught trying to soften his stance toward Drake in a completely different interview, saying he does not want to see Drake lose, saying he would even be happy to see Drake win. Now on the surface, that sounds like maturity. That sounds like a man growing up. But when you watch the two clips back to back, and you understand the context, and you understand that Set in Stone just posted the softest opening of his career, that pivot does not read as maturity. It reads as damage control. It reads as a man who realized, mid-rollout, that the strategy of attacking Drake was no longer paying off, and who is now quietly trying to reopen the door in case he needs to walk back through it later. And the internet, of course, immediately clocked it. Because the internet always clocks it. And here is where 50 Cent's whole angle starts to make even more sense, because 50 Cent has been in this exact position before on both sides of it. 50 Cent knows what it looks like when a veteran artist overpromises and underdelivers. 50 Cent knows what it looks like when the numbers stop matching the mouth. 50 Cent knows how quickly the internet turns on a rapper who confuses momentum with mythology. And when 50 Cent looks at Rick Ross this week, he does not just see an old rival. He sees a textbook example of every mistake a legacy rapper can make in the modern streaming era. Which is why 50 Cent's posts are not landing like petty jabs. They're landing like receipts. They're landing like a case being built in public, one screenshot at a time. Now I want to talk about something the industry does not really like to say out loud, but that has been quietly whispered in every green room and every podcast studio for the last 2 years. There is a shift happening in hip-hop, and it is not the shift most people think it is. Everybody talks about the shift toward streaming. Everybody talks about the shift toward short-form video. Everybody talks about the shift in demographics. But the deeper shift, the shift that is quietly eating veteran artists alive, is the shift in how the audience emotionally relates to legacy. 10 years ago, being a legend was a shield. If you had put in the work, if you had classic albums, if you had shaped the culture, the audience would carry you through soft moments out of respect. Today, that shield is gone. Today, the audience will laugh at a legend the exact same way it laughs at a rookie. Today, the moment your numbers slip, the culture treats you like a stock chart, not like a Hall of Fame. And that is a brutal environment for a rapper like Rick Ross, whose entire brand identity was built on the mythology of the boss, the untouchable, the man at the top of the mountain. Because once the mountain shakes, even a little bit, the mythology cracks. And once the mythology cracks, the whole persona has nowhere to hide. That is what makes Set in Stone such a fascinating case study, because Set in Stone was clearly built as a legacy statement. The title itself, Set in Stone, is a claim about permanence. It is a claim that this album, this era of the boss is fixed, non-negotiable, chiseled into the record forever. But permanence is not something you can announce. Permanence is something the audience decides for you. And the audience, at least this week, decided the opposite. The audience decided that instead of setting anything in stone, he set himself up for one of the loudest, most public, most meme-worthy rollouts of the entire year. Every part of the presentation, from the cover art to the visualizer to the promo posts to the tour rollout, is being picked apart in real time. Fans are joking that the animation on the album cover looks awkward. Fans are joking that certain flows on the record sound like impressions of other artists. Fans are joking that entire songs feel like a copy of a copy of a copy of styles that were already worn out 3 years ago. And the more the jokes pile up, the harder it becomes for anybody in his camp to control the narrative around any of it. And then there is the fan base itself, which is a story in its own right. Because the boss has a loyal, dedicated, long-standing fan base, and that fan base is not disappearing over one album. Long-term supporters are still in the comments defending him, still streaming the album out of loyalty, still showing up to argue with critics on Twitter and Instagram. But even inside that fan base, you can hear a different tone this week. You can hear people saying they wish the promo run had focused more on the music. You can hear people admitting that Set in Stone did not live up to the expectations he himself created. You can hear people quietly pointing out that maybe the beef was not worth the cost. And when your own fan base starts wording their defense that carefully, that is a sign the ground has shifted, even if nobody in the camp wants to admit it out loud yet. Meanwhile, Drake has said absolutely nothing. And that silence is doing more work than any diss track ever could. Because Drake does not need to respond this week. Drake is watching the numbers. Drake is watching 50 Cent do the heavy lifting. Drake is watching the internet laugh. Drake is watching an old rival soften his own tone in interviews. Drake is watching the tour tickets not move. And every day Drake stays quiet, the contrast between Drake's commercial dominance and the boss's commercial slump grows louder without a single word being said. That is the power move of the year, and it is not being executed with a verse or a diss or a subliminal Instagram post. It is being executed with pure, deliberate absence. And absence in a beef this loud is honestly the most humiliating response a rival can give you, because it says, you are not important enough to acknowledge. You are not on my level. You are not worth the ink. You handle yourself. And Rick Ross, right now, is handling himself right into a viral meltdown. And if you rewind the last decade of hip-hop and try to find a comparable moment, you will really struggle. Rick Ross is not the first veteran to drop a soft album, but the combination of empty arenas, sub 10,000 streams, a 2,000-unit projection, and a public shredding by 50 Cent all landing in the same 72-hour window is genuinely unprecedented. That combination is why this story keeps getting bigger. So where does Rick Ross go from here? That is the question everybody in the culture is trying to answer, and honestly, there is no easy path forward. Option 1 is to double down. Option 1 is to hit the studio, drop a diss track, escalate the drama, and try to convert the backlash into fuel. That option has worked for artists before, but it usually only works when the artist has a clear opponent willing to engage. Drake is not engaging. 50 Cent is engaging, but 50 Cent is a media strategist as much as he is a rapper, and going at 50 Cent on wax is a war very few people have ever won. Option 2 is to retreat. Option 2 is to disappear from the internet for a month or two, let the temperature cool, let the memes cycle out, and come back with a smaller, more focused project that reminds people why they respected Rick Ross in the first place. That option has worked for artists before too, but it requires patience, humility, and a willingness to let the noise die on its own, and he has not exactly built a career on any of those three traits. Option 3 is the hardest one, which is to actually address it. To sit down for one long, honest interview, own the rollout, acknowledge the missteps, apologize to the fans who felt lied to by the promo run, and start rebuilding trust from zero. That option has almost never been executed cleanly by anybody in hip-hop, because rap culture punishes vulnerability more than almost any other genre. But if he wants to save the second half of this era, some version of that conversation may be the only way through. And while everybody argues about what Rick Ross should do next, the most important lesson from this whole saga is one that every rapper watching should be writing down. The lesson is this. In the modern era, the promo run is the album. What you say in interviews, what you claim on podcasts, what you post on social media, that is not marketing anymore. That is the first draft of the story the audience will use to judge the music. And if the music does not match the story, the audience will not blame the music, they will blame you. They will feel like you took their attention, spent 3 months telling them a version of the truth that was not true, and handed them a product that was not worth the wait. And nothing angers a modern audience faster than feeling like it wasted its own energy. Rick Ross did not just release an album this week. He released 3 months of expectations, wrapped in one project, and the moment the project came up short, all 3 months of expectations came crashing down at once. That is the trap. That is the whole trap. And he walked into it with his eyes wide open, chest out, chain shining, laughing at everybody else on the way in. And there is one more layer to this whole story that almost nobody is talking about, but that might be the single most damaging piece of the entire week, and it has to do with the culture of the podcasts he chose to lean on during his 3-month promo run. Rosé did not spend his rollout inside safe, curated interviews with softball hosts. He spent his rollout on the loudest, most confrontational, most clip-driven shows in the industry. And the strategy there was obvious. He wanted the friction. He wanted the debate. He wanted every host to push back on him, because every pushback created another viral moment. But here is the part of that strategy that clearly was not accounted for. When you build your entire rollout on confrontational clips, you also build a mountain of confrontational clips that can be replayed against you the moment your album does not deliver. And that is exactly what is happening right now. Every reaction channel on YouTube is stitching those podcast clips into breakdown videos. Every hip-hop commentator is quoting him word for word, then comparing those quotes to the set in stone numbers. The same platforms that boosted him for 3 months are now being used to dismantle him in 72 hours. And the speed of that turn is honestly what makes this era so unforgiving. There is no cool down period anymore. There is no grace week. The internet does not wait for the dust to settle. The internet lives in the dust. And if you zoom in on how the online reaction has actually organized itself, the pattern is even more revealing. This is not one wave of criticism. This is 3 separate waves stacked on top of each other. Wave 1 is the music critics, the people who genuinely listened to Set in Stone and walked away underwhelmed by the songwriting, the sequencing, the direction. Wave 2 is the numbers crowd, the people who never even pressed play but ran straight to the sales projections and turned every screenshot into a meme. Wave 3, which is the loudest and the meanest, is the personality crowd, the people who do not care about the album or the numbers and are just enjoying watching a man who talked as much as Rick Ross talked over the last 90 days get corrected in real time. And when all three waves crash into the same shore at the same moment, the noise becomes deafening, and the artist in the middle of it has no clear enemy to fight because he is being attacked on three completely different fronts by three completely different crowds. That is what makes this specific collapse feel so total. He does not have one problem this week. He has three problems this week, and each one requires a completely different solution. Now, before I let you go, I want to zoom out one more time, because there is one last piece of this story that has not gotten enough attention, and it might be the piece that determines how history remembers this whole chapter. Rick Ross is not the only veteran rapper going through a public correction right now. All across hip-hop, artists of a certain generation are hitting a wall at roughly the same time. Streaming has changed the physics of the industry. Short-form video has changed the rules of engagement. A new generation of listeners has grown up with completely different tastes, completely different heroes, completely different attention spans. And veteran artists who built their careers in the album era are being forced to learn a completely new language, in public, in real time, while a much younger and hungrier group of rappers is eating their lunch. The Miami Boss is not the first, and he is not going to be the last, but Set in Stone will very likely become the case study that everybody points at when this era is written down. The album that promised permanence and delivered a meme. The album that promised classic status and delivered a soft opening. The album whose failure said more about the industry than about the artist. And that, more than any single sales number, is why this week feels so historic. But make no mistake, none of that context softens what happened. Rick Ross said what he said. He did what he did. He made the promises he made, took the shots he took, dismissed the artists he dismissed, and then handed the mic over to the audience. And the audience answered. Loudly. Immediately. Without mercy. 50 Cent is laughing. Drake is silent. The tour is soft. The projections are bad. The reviews are worse. The memes are everywhere. And in the middle of it all is the boss himself, holding an album he called Set in Stone, watching the ground move under his feet in every direction at once. So now I want to hand this over to you. Do you think what is happening this week is fair, or do you think the internet is being way too harsh on a legend who has earned the right to a few soft releases in a long career? Do you think Rick Ross needed a Drake feature to save Set in Stone commercially, or do you think leaning on Drake would have made the album feel less like his? Do you think 50 Cent is being petty, or do you think 50 Cent is just holding up a mirror to things the Miami Boss has been saying about other rappers for years? Drop your answer in the comments below, because I read every single one of them, and I promise you the conversation down there is going to be just as wild as the story you just watched. And if you made it this far in the video, do me a favor and tap the like button, hit subscribe if you have not already, and turn on notifications so you never miss a breakdown like this one. Because there is another huge story dropping in the culture very soon, and you are going to want to be here the moment it hits. I have another deep dive queued up right now that connects directly to everything you just heard, and if you thought the Set in Stone situation was wild, wait until you see what is coming next. Thank you for watching, thank you for rocking with me, and I will see you in the next one. Before I sign off completely, I want to leave you with one final thought, because I think it matters more than any of the numbers we broke down tonight. Rick Ross is not finished. Nobody in this culture is ever really finished until they decide to be. Careers in hip-hop bend, they stretch, they dip, and sometimes they collapse in public the way this week just collapsed, but they also rebuild in ways that nobody sees coming. The same audience that is laughing at Set in Stone tonight is fully capable of standing up and applauding the next project from the Miami Boss if he shows up with the right sound, the right focus, and the right honesty. That is the paradox of this era. The knives come out fast, but so do the flowers. And Rosie, whether the internet wants to admit it or not, has enough runway left to write a completely different ending to this story if he chooses to. Whether he chooses to is the only question that actually matters, and it is a question only he can answer. Until he does, the rest of us are just watching, waiting, and refreshing the timeline to see which move he makes next.